Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for coming over and watching this video. This video is going to be all about Felix. As a lot of you will know from Facebook and Instagram, before Christmas he got taken into hospital and he was really quite unwell. Because of that, I've had a lot of questions about him, exactly what happened, exactly how he knew, and as I said on a vlog the other day, I get that. I'm the same. I'm a parent. I really do worry about my two, especially Felix, so I always want to know kind of details of everything that went on. So I just thought that I would pop along here and give you all a quick update. So Felix hadn't been too well in the days leading up to going into hospital, obviously, but we were really unaware. He had very red cheeks, he was pulling at his ear, and when I looked in his mouth he was cutting, I think it was about 6 teeth, or it looked like he was cutting about 6 teeth. So to me that all made perfect sense. You know, red cheeks, red ear, teething, didn't want to eat. And he just wasn't very happy, and actually I feel really bad saying it, but we were getting a bit frustrated because he was just so grumpy and just not himself at all. The day before he went in, that night he had temperatures all night, and the next day he was supposed to be going to his granny's house, but he had temperatures on and off, so I just thought, no, I'll keep him with me. He had a really rough morning, bless him, so temperature, which Calpol and Nurofen was helping, but then that afternoon he really started to perk up, his temperatures came down, so we kind of thought that he was on the mend. And then, what was it? Oh yes, so then that evening, my husband said, oh, have you ever noticed that one of his ears sticks out? And I thought, no, I've never noticed that before, but it didn't look like it was bad, it just looked like one of his ears was sticking out ever so slightly. So we just kind of thought nothing of it, put him to bed. I had a really rough night with him that night. He had high temperature, he was crying, but he was taking milk and things like that, and he was settled when he was with me. So again, no kind of red flags came up. And especially with Felix, I've always, because his kind of main issues are around breathing and bronchiolitis and things like that, that's what I guess I was focused on, and that was what I was really looking at, whether his breathing was okay and whether he was coughing, and he didn't have any of that. When we look back now, actually I guess it is a bit strange that he did have such high temperatures with no coughs or runny nose or anything like that. So obviously throughout the night it was dark, and when I feed him or if I need to get him up, I do try and keep everything quite dark. So I hadn't noticed that his ear and his head was massively swollen, which sounds awful, but you know, it's the middle of the night and you're really tired, and I keep thinking back to that night and thinking maybe if I had realised during the night then we could have got him there quicker, but I guess you can't change things really. So the next morning we got him up, realised that his head and his ear was really swollen. He still had a temperature, so we made the decision to get a doctor's appointment for him. And within about 20 minutes of making that doctor's appointment, both myself and my husband just looked at him and just said, no, like, let's just bypass the GP and go straight to A&E. And as I was getting ready, I was rushing and I was panicking to take him into A&E. Half of me was thinking, oh my goodness, I think he's got something like meningitis. This is really bad. And then the other half of me was thinking, they're going to say, why on earth have you brought this child in for a swollen ear and a temperature? So I guess I didn't really, I was panicking, but I didn't believe that anything was majorly wrong. I just took him by myself and Ben stayed with Marley, and as we were driving over to the hospital I really thought, he's not right at all. He was sitting in his car seat and he was kind of in and out of sleep, but his head was kind of flopped forward and there was so much traffic and I was just freaking out. But anyway, we got there, we got to A&E. At East Surrey Hospital they have a paediatrics A&E, so you never have to wait, no matter what the problem is, they just take you straight in. And as soon as you get there you're triaged. I've been there before with Felix and Marley on other occasions, and once you're actually in the paediatric A&E and you've been seen by a nurse, then usually you wait a little bit to see the doctor. But with Felix, I got in, I sat down, she asked me a couple of questions, she put his the little monitor on his foot, took his temperature, and that was that. Straight away, it was kind of all panic stations, and she gave him a big dose of paracetamol. He was then taken into a bay, kind of on the other side, and within a couple of minutes of being there, there was a nurse coming over with a dose of morphine for him. So I was really shocked. I kind of, because I didn't know what was wrong with him at that point, even though they all clearly did, I was shocked when they decided to give him a dose of morphine, which they give up the nose to babies. I knew straight away that something wasn't right, and he just wouldn't stop crying. So he was going between really, really crying and then being quite floppy and unresponsive, temperature still high. So anyway, they came and gave him morphine, and then within a couple of minutes of that, there was a whole team of doctors who were standing around him, and pretty much instantly they told me what was wrong with him, and that was that he had something called mastoiditis, which is where an infection, he had an ear infection, which obviously we hadn't realised, and it was in the middle ear, and it had got through the pockets in the middle ear, and it was affecting his mastoid bone in his skull, and their main concern was that it was travelling quickly to his brain because he got kind of ill, he had deteriorated so quickly. So the first thing that they gave me were consent forms to sign for surgery, and they kind of briefly went over what that would be, and it was horrible really, because I was there on my own and I knew he was so poorly, so I had to, there's no signal in there like to make a phone call anyway, so I just had to text my husband and say, like, you have to come now, this is really bad. And I could hear in the background the doctors saying, you know, we've got a 14-month-old, blah, 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 and he needs CT scans and all of this. That was their initial plan at that point, was to get him straight up to CT. But they didn't in the end. And they didn't do that because he was quite little, and they didn't think they'd actually be able to see. The mastoid bone isn't very developed, so they didn't think they'd be able to see enough, and they didn't also want to put him under two general anaesthetics if he was going to be going into surgery as well. So anyway, we got taken up to the child assessment unit. So he was admitted. At that point, they had told me, like, you are not coming home this week. No way. He has to go straight onto IV antibiotics. They took bloods within an hour or so of being there, and then within an hour or so of that, they started him on IV antibiotics. He had perked up a bit actually by then because he was on the morphine, and he kind of wanted to play a bit, so he was walking around like kind of a drunk man, high as a kite on morphine. Ben was there at that point. Ben was there when they took the bloods and when they started the IV antibiotics. And after another hour or so, they came back to say to us that his blood results had come back in and it was a bacterial infection, and his infection markers were very, very high. So his, I think they're supposed to be about 10, and his were 122. And then his white blood cell count was 23.3, I think it said on his form. So definitely in line with a bacterial infection. So we just waited there. We then got transferred onto the ward. So we were on the ward for the first night, the children's ward, and they were lovely. I had a really lovely nurse because obviously I was on my own with him during the night. They don't let two parents stay. And it was an awful night with him. He was beside himself. He was in pain. But that nurse was amazing and gave him some more pain relief. So that was good. The next morning they then came and told us that we would be moved up to, more than likely be moved up to St George's for him to have surgery. So that kind of freaked me out again, and I just thought, I cannot believe that it has come to this. In actual fact, we stayed for the whole time at East Surrey. After the first night, they moved us into a private room, and it looked like the antibiotics were working. He hadn't had any more temperatures, but during that night, his temperature spiked again, and they kind of came in a couple of hours later and said that they were going to take him into surgery that morning. There were two options for the surgery. One was to go in through the ear and one was to go in through the skull. basically. They tried going in through the ear first, which was successful. And that was to kind of just drain all of the infection and the abscess off. So they make an incision in the eardrum, put a grommet in, drain it out through that. So, where was I? Yes, so we went in, which was awful, whilst he got put under. It wasn't, I mean, it was awful. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, because they let my husband in as well, so he was actually able to hold him. But there's nothing worse than leaving your baby in an operating theatre. It's just awful. But when we went to get him, they were pleased that they got lots of the infection out, so that was really good. And then everything kind of really improved from there. So he carried on with his IV antibiotics after the surgery. His veins were just shot by that point. He had had so many cannulas and blood tests and everything, they were really struggling, so all his veins were collapsing. And the day after his surgery, they decided that they didn't really have anywhere else to go with the cannulas, so they would put him onto oral antibiotics, which half of me was really concerned, because I thought I want him to get the kind of straight in antibiotics, and the other half of me was just so relieved not to have to deal with any more cannulas. If any of you have had babies or toddlers where you've had to have cannulas in, you'll know it's an absolute mission. The doctors and nurses are amazing. I don't know how they do it with veins that are so tiny, but they do, and they're great. But I was relieved to get that out. Because he had been moved on to oral antibiotics, they then said that he could come home, and that actually it would be better for him to be at home, because he was doing well. There are so many bugs and germs with other children, so to take him home and monitor him really carefully for temperatures and things like that. So this was just a couple of days before Christmas, and obviously I was overjoyed that my baby was going to be okay, and also that we'd be home for Christmas with Marley, because we had left him, and that was just so sad, and he really missed us, and he really missed Felix, and he didn't know what was going on because everything happened so quickly. But a couple of hours after being told that we were allowed home, the doctor came in again and told us that the infection was in his blood. So his most recent blood tests had come back. So they take 48 hours blood cultures. So no, it wasn't his most recent, it was his first ones, had come back and shown that it was in his blood. So he had sepsis. And although the antibiotics they were treating him with were good, they weren't sure if they were exactly the right ones, whether it would be successful for sepsis and a blood infection. So he said, you can still go home, but you have to monitor him like super, super carefully. If you're not happy with anything, then you bring him straight back in. And in the meantime, we will get the new blood test results back. And if anything shows blood infection, then you'll have to come straight back in, and we'll start IV antibiotics again. Those blood tests came back a couple of days later, which felt like the longest wait, but they were good. So they were going in the right direction. His infection markers were coming down, things like that. The sepsis side of it kind of knocked me over the edge. I felt like I'd been quite calm up until that point, and then it just sent me into panic. I know from lots of Facebook groups and Mother Without a Child, I don't know if any of you follow her, that sepsis can be so dangerous and it can take over just like that. And in my head I just thought, oh my goodness, if we had left him a few hours longer, then goodness knows what would have happened. The infection probably would have got to his brain, the sepsis would have become more aggressive, and it just doesn't bear thinking about. He has come away from this infection relatively okay. So there is a chance that because of the infection was so aggressive, that there is kind of irreversible damage in that ear. He may have no hearing in that ear. He may have partial hearing in that ear. He could be lucky and he could have brilliant hearing in that ear. I've been lucky enough to speak to lots of other parents since coming home whose children have had mastoiditis, and although lots of them unfortunately do lose their hearing, you know, the other half of them are absolutely fine. So I'm keeping everything crossed. I'm watching him very carefully, trying to see if I can tell if he can hear in that ear, and I can't. It's impossible. So we have his hearing test the week after next. and then we have a consultant appointment to discuss, you know, if there is something structurally that could have caused him to have this, to cause the infection to get in, right, kind of through the air pockets, or if it was just a coincidence. At the moment we've been told that it is possible that it could come back in that ear, it is possible that it could appear in the other ear. But they do have to tell you all the risks, and that's a risk. So we're just trying to stay calm about it. But on the whole, he is doing really, really well. So I just feel so lucky and so blessed that he is here, he's with us, he's okay. I also feel a little bit traumatised and a little bit apprehensive about going forward, and if I will know if it happens again. Will I really know? I feel like I missed it before, and that's what I can't stop thinking about, is that something was wrong and I didn't realise. I'm so glad that I took him to East Surrey when I did, and that makes me think, no, you did an alright job, you're not a totally crappy mum, you did take him to A&E, you did realise eventually, and maybe if I hadn't have been such an anxious mum, maybe I would have waited a few hours more to take him to A&E, and then we may not have a baby now. So my advice to all of you would be, if you're worried, just take them in. They don't mind checking them. They really don't. Take them in, get them checked. If there are any warning signs of sepsis, and I'll put a link down below with all of the details on that, then get them in. If you're worried about their ears, get them in. You're going in blind with ears, you can't see, they might be red, they might be pulling at them, but they pull at them when they're teething, they pull at them when they've got a cold, all of these different things. So do make sure that you're just vigilant, and yeah, because it's the most important thing. And also I can't thank the staff at East Surrey Hospital enough for the way they moved so quickly when we got there, which still makes my blood run cold thinking about that kind of first hour of being in there. But they moved so quickly, and they're amazing, and all of the nurses and all of the surgeons, doctors, anaesthetists, they're all amazing. So despite all of the horrible negative news about the NHS this week, we're lucky and they are amazing. And yeah, there might be some faults with it, but they save lives. And that's the most important thing. So I'm going to go and get Felix now so that you can all see him, and then I will leave you all in peace. So here he is, little Felix. He's not so little. Can you say hi? He can see himself on the screen. Can you say hello? So he is all better. It was this ear which was the culprit, so you can see, if you can see, he's a bit wriggly. But it just looks completely normal now. You wouldn't be able to tell, but really when he had it, his whole ear and head was just awful, really sticking out. Oh, so that's not going to work then, Felix, is it? No. And in a minute he's going to start pulling the camera thing. Anyway, well, you've seen him. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that answers some of your questions. I'm sorry if it was a bit of a ramble. I just had to get through that without without crying, basically. But that's done now. If any of you have any more questions, please do put them in the links down below. Oh, Felix has just knocked the light over. And I will see you all very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.